Hello and good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited that you are here with us today. We are live. Our program Thrive Live with Innergy Inc. and formerly known as Inner Light Incorporated. We are so glad that you're with us. We have a very special guest today. Her name is Erin, and Erin is going to share her story and her life with us. And so we so much appreciate you. My co-host today is Tawana Lee. She's our social worker on tap, and if there is a need, we will be sure to refer you. Thrive Live is a program that is sponsored by Health HIV and the DC Department of Health, and so we're excited to be able to bring to you very real stories, real people with real solutions. And so we're going to talk about what's been going on in Erin's life right now and have her share with us her story. And we're going to talk about getting access to mental health and how family traumas and dramas may affect people them individually, but also how what we do to prevent this from carrying on into the next generation. Erin is a mother with two small boys, and so she is also working to keep the drama from passing on, right, Erin, to another generation.
Definitely.
Tawana is having a couple of technical difficulties, but she will be right back with us. So without much further ado, we're going to get started. We want to remind you that if you are looking for any particular help for mental health and for substance use disorders, you can see the message on the bottom of your screen there with the DC Department of Health Behavioral Helpline. That's 1-887-WE-HELP. That's 202-673-2200. You can also call 202-561-7000. So without further ado, Erin, hey, Tawana, welcome.
Hello. Hi, Aaron.
Hi.
Good to have you with us again, Tawana, my wonderful, beautiful co-host and sister, Tawana Lee. Hey, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm good. Come on now, social worker. I'm gonna need more. Oh, I'm gonna need more than okay. I'm gonna need some energy and pep. Come on, give it to us now. So we have another. For those of you that are watching or that are tuning in today, we will have another podcast that starts around 4 o'clock with another special guest. So without further ado, let's introduce to you Erin. Erin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story? Take a few minutes to tell your story. We'll ask some questions and we'll see if we can get some insight that will help some of our watchers and viewers today. Erin?
Of course. Well, I was brought into the world to two um, people who really could not stand each other. Um, my father woke up once after being sober and looked over at my mother and said, "Who the heck are you?" Like, he was just that drugged up. And she said, "Well, I'm your wife." And shocker, 22 years later, we found out they were actually never married. My mom just completely lied about that. Um, Growing up, my dad was in and out of my life. He wasn't a consistent person, but my mother was, but we were constantly on the streets. I grew up on the streets of downtown Denver, and she was in and out of homeless shelters. She was never, any job that she had, she'd always show up either high or drunk. And it was just this ongoing battle of trying to survive. When my younger brother was born, who I had been adopted with when I got a little bit older, he was also in and out of the hospital with different issues like fetal alcohol effect and just all the issues that come with having a mother who was always on drugs. She never kept a job. She got with another man who was constantly abusive to all of us in every single way. And we were finally taken away when I was about 8 years old. And then we were put into foster care, but my brother stayed with one family while I got moved around. So the people who eventually adopted us were the first foster family I was with. And as my foster family, I was always grateful for them. They eventually adopted us because the courts wouldn't let anybody split us up, me and my brother. And my mother was a narcissist, and she was bipolar. And this is both mothers, like my biological mother and my adopted mother, highly narcissistic and controlling in every way possible. And as a mom, looking back now, I always question how somebody could act that way and teach their children to be like that. So we do keep a distance away from almost all of my family because nobody wants their kids to be around that. We had one incident where we saw my parents for 3 weeks because of COVID, and we were just stuck there. They were in the middle of nowhere. They live in the middle of nowhere. And we were stuck there, and my sons got to witness firsthand how my mother can be. And so it was at that point that I decided that that was going to be at the end of that. And it's always really hard to come out of having parents like that. I went from one abusive relationship to the next. My husband was abusive and a narcissist. And it was just a pattern. And finally, I was fed up with that and said no more. You know, I got on antidepressants. I lost a lot of weight. I've grown as a person because at some point you realize that even though life has been one battle after another, I'm still alive. And I wasn't supposed to be. I've had many people tell me statistics of foster kids who come out of situations like me ending up in a ditch or in prison. And I'm a single mom who has her own place. And I'm just grateful every day that I was able to bounce back. And I've always told myself that I was a warrior. I was always a warrior. I was able to find good in every situation and just keep going. And it's difficult to move on from different things and not hold on to it. But at the end of the day, I'm still living, and God he just keeps giving.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for sharing so much of your story. I remember talking with you before the show, and you mentioned also observing some traumas in your family, some issues with your parents and their substance use, and how did those things affect you? And did you ever find yourself repeating any of those patterns of substance use or other kinds of addictive types of behavior or other mental health challenges?
I have a very addictive personality because of what I witnessed as a kid. My father was a drug addict, and I remember at the age of 3 walking up to him and telling him to stop because he would shoot up. And it was just constantly this not recognizing who I was sometimes. My mother would come home drunk and just puke all over the couch, and I was a 5-year-old who was picking up after her. And I swore that day, I remember what happened. She said she had been working and she came home and she was just unrecognizable. And I hadn't seen her in probably 3 weeks. She would go days without coming home. And we had this little motel where there were these other people who were also drug addicts who would stay there and watch me for her. And she had been gone for a long time. And she came home and I didn't even recognize her. And I knew she was my mom. Like, you just know sometimes. And I took care of her. And I was just too little for that. And I swore that day I would never be like that. And so, no, I have an addictive personality. And I know I have that, which is why I refuse to find things like drugs or alcohol. You know, I'm a social drinker, but I'm not. I know my limits. I've taught myself my limits. I know when to stop. But when it comes to other things, books or TV, I've taken my addiction, my addictive personality, and turned it into something else. I've gone somewhere else. I love education, so I'm constantly picking up biographies or something else to better myself. Because if I'm addicted to something, I might as well find something that's going to make me a better person and get addicted to that. It's just a transference, not so much getting rid of it, but transferring it to something else.
Now, how many siblings do you have?
I have 5 siblings. I have an older sister who was adopted at birth because my mother was only, I think, 16 when she had her. Then there was me, and then there was my brother who lives in another state. I never met him until quite recently, about 5 years ago. He was adopted at birth. And then there was my other brother who I was adopted with. And then I have 2 younger siblings, a brother and a sister, who I've never met before. And they're not of age yet. So, being an unfit mother is definitely in my family, not being able to keep their kids. And so, that was a cycle that I knew I needed to break. I definitely needed to break that. And so having my children for as long as I have, has been one of those wonderful things that I can say that I did not follow in my mother's footsteps.
So what did you do?
Hmm?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So I look at it every day as I've been living my entire life trying to make sure that I'm not my mother, but at the same time living every day to be a better mother. I've always told everybody that I've always met is I never learned how to be a mom. I've learned how not to be one. So I live every day learning, and it is learning. And even if you have a great mother, it's every kid is different. And so just trying to figure out a system that works for you is always a good thing to do and remember, because those past memories will always pop up.
So can we jump a bit into your journey into the mental health world and how you navigated getting help? How did you recognize that you needed some help? What was going on for you that made you finally say, let me get some counseling, let me get some an assessment? What did you do, and how was that for you?
When I was put into foster care, one of the first things that, at least in the county that I was in, one of the first things they do is get you a counselor. I was seeing a therapist nonstop until I was 16 when I moved. We had been moving around a lot, but we had a very consistent counselor who was always there for us. And I saw her from the age of 18 until I was 16. And a lot of times it was on the phone because we were in other countries and stuff like that. But she was always a very consistent part of my life, and I had not had that before. And she was one of those counselors who just really thoroughly cared about her clients. And she was a wonderful person. She always had my side. She always knew I was going to do better. And she walked me through so many strategies of dealing with PTSD and depression and anxiety. I mean, I've had a stomach ulcer from stress since I was 12 years old. And the amount of stress that I was always under was immense. But for some reason, she told me the way she could say things to me and tell me that everything was going to be okay. And she was the one that got me into journaling. I have every journal I've ever made. And writing things out is just such a wonderful way to put what's in your head on paper. I'm not good at that. I'm not good at saying, I'm not good with words. I really am not. But being able to look at what I've written and say, that's what happened to me, and close the book and let it go is just, it's very helpful. And so when I left her when I was 16, I ended up moving to the UK. I got married. I was happy. I was healthy. I was living my best life. And then he died in Afghanistan. And at that point, it was a turning point for the worst. Because at that point, I had to move back in with my parents for about 9 months, we moved from the UK back to America, and I jumped right back into a relationship because I was married. I was ready. That was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a wife. I wanted to be a mother. So I jumped back into another relationship when I was not ready and ended up being abused. When we moved back to England, not England, back to the United States, we moved back to the same state we had been in before. So after all the struggles of leaving my parents, moving in with my new husband, and all the abuse that he threw at me, I ended up getting pregnant with my oldest. And he, my husband, did not want me to be pregnant at all. He just, something switched in his head, and he did not want me to be pregnant. He did everything in his power to make sure I did not keep the baby. And I ultimately ended up finding my old therapist. I saw her on Facebook, and we just reconnected. And she helped me find the resources that I needed to move on with my life. She got me out of that situation. I got put into a maternity home for women who were pregnant and homeless and needed a safe house, which is what I needed. And it wasn't the greatest place, but it saved my life. There's always resources out there. There are so many different places who are willing to help. And, you know, not necessarily church related, but the place that I went to was a Christian maternity home, and they were very helpful. And then I moved out to another city in Colorado. And at that point, I had been out of therapy for probably 2 or 3 years. And I knew it was time to get back into it because I have always been an angry person. And everybody will always tell you, you have a reason to be angry. But no, I don't. I don't have a reason to be angry. I have a reason to be joyful. I'm still alive. And I think that a lot of people forget that is I have a reason to be cautious, but not angry. So I got into social services. I went to social services in Colorado Springs and found a therapist, and they got me on antidepressants, and I started gaining weight like crazy. It was real bad. I gained so much weight, and I think that made it worse. It didn't make it any better. It definitely made it worse. And for a long time, I was lucky that I had lived with somebody else who could help me with my oldest. And then I was finally starting to feel a little bit better. I got into a relationship. I was happy. My son was, you know, going to kindergarten, and I was just so thrilled, and I felt like I was the best mom in the world because I was homeschooling, and we did our little thing every day, and you know, we had this table, and I was rocking it. And then I got broken up with, which brought back so many memories. My heart was I was broken and devastated. Well, the week after my breakup, my best friend who I lived with was going out of town. And I had my first husband's brother who was working on the military base that was right next to me. And I was like, hey, you should come over. I haven't seen you since I left the UK. Come on over. We'll have a blast. You can cheer me up since my best friend's leaving. And he came over, and he decided my idea of cheering me up and his idea for cheering me up were very, very different. And he threatened my son. He stood between us. And I said, fine, do what you want. And I ended up getting pregnant with my youngest. After that, I was broken again. And it took me probably 3 years to pick up the pieces and finally realize that bad things happen. You may be a good person, you may be a bad person, but a lot of things happen and you don't deserve them, whether you're good or bad. bad things happen to you, and the only thing you can do is just start over. So I moved once again, and I would say that finally having peace over peace, that's a big thing. Peace, having peace that no matter what happens, you're going to pick up those pieces and be just fine. No matter what happens, I withstood every single thing that life threw at me so far. And I have peace that no matter what happens in the future, I'm going to just get back up, pick up the pieces, and move on, because that's all you can do. And being joyful and happy that that's what happens, that you can just move on. It's going to come back and kick you in the butt sometimes, but just move on and everything will be better.
And are there things that you can think of that specifically your therapist said to you that you've held on to, something that that you got from that? I'm asking because so many of our folks that probably will watch this podcast at some point may not be sure about that. They may not be sure. They may be based on their religious background or personal experience or stories they've heard about what does that mean to be. Am I crazy? And is there something wrong with me if I have to see a therapist? Shouldn't I be able to pray it away? Shouldn't I be able to just be okay? What did someone say something? Was there something that held on to that helped you realize that it was okay to get therapy, and something that maybe helped you hold on in those times when you weren't in therapy?
I don't think there was any one specific thing that somebody said to me that made me think that, hey, therapy is okay. It's not just for crazy people. Because honestly, the fact that my therapist loved me more than my parents did, the fact that my therapist cared for me more than my parents did, or anybody else around me, to be honest. The fact that she was there anytime I needed to call her, and if she wasn't there, then she'd call me back. It's just having somebody in your life that is there to talk when you're having a panic episode or a PTSD attack, or just you had a really bad day and needed to talk to somebody. That is what made me continue doing therapy, because just having one person who is not a family member, who is not a friend, because you don't want to go to one friend talking about another friend because your heart's broken. You want to have somebody who's not a part of any of that. And having that one person who will tell you, no, you're not crazy. No, you should feel that way. But how are we going to move on from this point? Because you go to a friend and you say, hey, this person did that to me. And she'd be like, okay, let's go pit her, let's pull up. No, you need a therapist who's going to walk you through, okay, they did that. Why did it make you feel that way? What are you going to do to stay out of that situation next time? And how are you going to grow from this? And that's what a therapist or a counselor or anybody's going to do for you, is they're going to get you out of your head. They're going to sit you down and get you thinking logically, because emotionally you're going to be hurting, but logically you're going to know that you shouldn't be doing that. And so a therapist is a friend who is going to make sure you do the right thing. And I was little, I was 8 years old when I first started seeing a therapist. And just having them tell me that everything that happened was not my fault, when as an 8-year-old I felt like my entire family fell apart because of me, it's a lot of weight on your shoulders. My husband would hit me or something like that. That's a lot of weight, because you feel like it's your fault. And domestic violence is a huge epidemic in our country. And seeing a counselor or a therapist is one of the first steps to moving on with your life. And I know that if there's anybody who's out there listening to this, that if you ever feel stuck, like you can't do anything to get out of it, just remember it's just one step, just one step, just one step, and then you can run. And it's finding somebody or something in somebody that helps you make that first step. That's all you need is one step. And it's a good step.
Yeah. Thank you, Erin. That was everything was just so it was so beautiful. It was so spot on. Like every question that I wanted, you said it as I was writing it down. But thank you for your resiliency and showing what resiliency looks like. So
Thank you for saying that.
yes, ma'am. You did just help me draw out some additional questions for you though.
Okay.
So what you just described, right? The therapy process. That's not only good for someone who's thinking about or has been in therapy, that's also good for any fellow therapists who are listening.
Mm-hmm.
And it was helpful for me as well. Because yes, there have been those times where I'm like, okay, I'm just sitting here and I'm just listening to the person, like Daryl said, like, what's the key thing that if there was anything that they said? And I'm just like, okay, I don't think I said anything. I'm just listening to the person. I'm just, okay, I'm just here. I'm just asking them these questions. And so for myself and other therapists, that was very important that you said that that is what matters. We know this, right? We know this by the book. We know that that's what it said. We're told this over and over that that's all that matters is that you were there, that one person. But it's different when you actually hear it from someone who's been to therapy. So thank you for that. So my question, you started saying how journaling helped you and you had a stomach ulcer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then later you talked about how you knew that you were angry. You've always been angry. What did the therapist help you with learning your signs, your warning signs? Like, how did you know you were angry? Was it something about your body or what? Because it's not just you. You're not an angry person.
I think the one thing that made me realize that I was constantly angry was we had just moved back from the UK. And I didn't learn about this about myself until after I was 19. I was 19. And we had a 24-hour fitness that was just down the street. And we had like one of those really nice ones. They were huge. And my mom, as a gift, got me. My mom didn't give me gifts very often. If she did get me a gift, it was to hint that I needed to lose weight or something else. The narcissistic behavior. But besides the backhanded comment that came with the gift, I was thrilled because I was a gym rat. And I know I don't look like that now, but I was. And I would go every day and go to the gym. I would run there. I would run to the gym and then go and ask if I could use a printing machine, and they had a boxing station. And I would put a picture of who I was mad at on the oh my goodness, the punching bag. And then, beat it out and then go home because my parents were always yelling at each other. One day I ran, my parents had been fighting and they had brought me into the middle of it again because I'm supposed to fix the marriage. And I ran to the gym again. And as I walked in, the guy at the front desk said, "Who do I need to print out this time?" And I knew at that moment that it was just, I needed to let that go. If the guy at the front desk of the 24-hour fitness knows that I'm that angry, and who do I need to go punch right now, then I just need to figure out how to let that go. So when I eventually found my therapist again, and I relayed that to her, she told me that anger is a reaction of two different things: hurt and fear. And journaling has become a big thing because every time I get angry, I write down which of those two things I'm feeling. and why, and what I can do to fix that. Because anger is just a reaction of something that has occurred, not necessarily to you, but just has occurred. And if you can figure out how to fix the reaction, and I'm not saying like that makes you broken or a mess, or anger is such a natural feeling. But if you can figure out how to fix your own reaction to things that happen, then and just write it down, you'll see a pattern. And that was my biggest thing, was I started noticing a pattern of how something would upset me, I would get angry, and what I would do about it. And I started noticing that I didn't get less angry. I just started reacting differently to it. And I think that's all that is to be expected of us as human beings, is we're allowed fully to feel. You know, feeling is something, it's a God-given thing. It keeps us alive. And it's probably a podcast for another day, but you know, having a very emotional boy, you know, and everybody's saying, well, he's just going to grow up to be not a manly man because he's emotional. Yeah, that's not true. As a woman, I can say I love it when men tell me their emotions, but you know, emotions have been so thrown out of whack in our society that you don't feel like you're allowed to express them. So if you just write them down, that can be expression enough. You don't have to react the wrong way to somebody. Just write it down and tell yourself how you're feeling and what you're going to do to fix it. So after that, coming up with the pattern and seeing how I fixed it, I noticed that my ulcers started, you know, going down. I wasn't as stressed as much. I have horrible eczema on my fingers. I have vascular eczema. The only time it comes out is when I'm really, really anxious or stressed. And that started going down, and it got better because I would just write it down and tell myself, look at how far you've come, you know. You know, I get flare-ups every now and again, but that's life. Life is a roller coaster. But as long as you react better the next time than you did the last time, then I'd say that's progress.
Yes, ma'am. Indeed. So you talked about the importance of a therapist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have the little triangle that you should have: community support, family support, and professional support. So through all the things that you've gone through, you've already mentioned how family wasn't really there.
No.
You had the professional support of the therapist. So were your friends there? What kind of other social support did you have?
Friends have been, okay, I'm a nerd of the highest degree. And it's really hard to, and I'm very antisocial, and I'm an introvert, and I like to just stay home and read my books because books can't do nothing to you but make you cry. And so making friends has always been really hard for me. I was homeschooled when I was with my parents, except for high school. So I never really learned how to make friends. When I got to the homeless shelter, I met a woman who ultimately became my best friend. And we have since moved away from each other. And you know, there became toxic. We became very codependent on each other, and I think that's something that happens when you get out of relationships like we had been in, and it had gotten toxic and everything. But the distance has made us draw closer, you know, and having somebody there for you who you can talk to, cry to, and I don't know, some people may know what I'm talking about, but there's an episode of Friends where Monica is getting married and Rachel is moving out, and they just start like blabbering, and nobody can understand them but them. And I feel like having a friend where you can go on the phone and just cry like that too, and they can understand, but everybody else around you is like, what the heck? It's an amazing thing, but it took so long. I was 22 years old when I met her. We didn't become best friends until we were 25. We had been living together. I was 25. It took 3 years of living with her for me to consider her a friend. And it takes a lot of time, and it sucks. It really does that friends take so long, especially when your trust has been broken so much. But having somebody there for you who you can just run to at any point, who knows your crazy family and your crazy past and loves you anyway. And I think it is important, especially for those who have had mental abuse or mental health issues, and to trust people and open up, but don't be afraid to open up. I mean, I say that, but like, don't open up right away. Like, give it time. But being unafraid to open up and let somebody in is not a bad thing all the time. And so I think that having friends, especially when you don't have family, is a very important thing. And I have since made other friends, and it's, I still like being in the comforts of my own home, but every now and again I'll go out, and it's nice. And they don't have to know everything about you. They don't have to know the ups and downs of every abusive relationship you've ever had. But having somebody there who may not know what you're going through, but is happy that you are there is really enough sometimes. To just have somebody that you can go and just cry on, and not have anybody, they may not even care why you're crying. They're just there to let you cry. It's important.
Aaron, one of the things that we talk about in different settings, and even in the theater world where I also live and reign sometimes, is we talk. There's a theater exercise that says you stand with somebody, you look them in the face, and then you keep saying until you really feel it, I can be hurt by you. And it is the idea of being able to allow yourself that level of vulnerability. And in other settings, we talk to people about relationships, and we tell them that the best way for you to be able to have a legitimate relationship is to be able to be vulnerable, knowing that you can, when you let the guards down, that's when you know that you're really loving someone, when you know that that person has the capacity to hurt you. Not that you want them to hurt you, not that we're aiming for being hurt, right? But it tells you that your heart is open to receiving the love, because it can also receive and process a rejection. And if you're cold to that or not open to that, then you're really closed off, and the person wanting to love you can't fully get in there. So I think it's interesting that you talk about that. And I wanted to sort of highlight this idea of vulnerability, of being able to be vulnerable, both in a professional setting with a therapist, but also within your intimate friendships and relationships. That there is something about being able to be vulnerable that lets you be cared for and loved in a way that we can't always do by ourselves when we close ourselves off. So you mentioned in the story that you told me about, and I want to dig too deep back in the past, other things you observed with your family, with your mom particularly, and then things that your adopted mom would say to you that were similar to things your mom had done. How do you keep yourself from saying and repeating those things that you've been hearing since you were a child, and the in and out of shelters, in and out of stability? What do you tell yourself that helps you? Or have you caught yourself and had to go back and fix some things that you might have said to your children that are repeats from things you've heard, or because it's in there, it's ingrained in us, that stuff, right? As much as we say we're not going to be our parents, I find myself sometimes saying, "Oh my goodness, I sound like so and so," and then I have to consciously make sure that my intention behind it is different than what I was perceiving the intention when I got it. So, as an example, my daughter will sometimes ask me something, and sometimes I don't respond. And that my dad used to do that, where it would really frustrate me. Where it's like I'm asking you a legitimate question, you can really answer me, and this was not when I was 5. I was probably much older. So not answering it to me is rude and disrespectful to me, even though I'm a child, right? So for my daughter, sometimes I will find myself, she'll ask me, she's 5, so she'll ask a gazillion questions all in a row. And so sometimes I'm like,
Definitely.
where are we going right now? Well, you're in the car and we're going there. You're going to know where we're going as we get there, you know. But I have to remember that she has an inquisitive mind. She's making connections to what she sees, and so that she can know where she's at. And so asking the question is helpful. So I remind myself to answer those questions. So I'm curious, what do you do, if anything, to either catch yourself if you said something that you know was not the best thing to say to your children, or to prevent it when it's, you know, if it's coming up, you know?
Well, my oldest is autistic and has ADHD. And so the inquisitive mind with him never stopped. Like, it is always constant. And he wants to be a marine biologist. So he'll ask me questions that I don't know what the duck does when that happens. Like, what? But he gets overly frustrated when I don't know an answer. And I remember looking back with, you know, and that's going based off of what you said. And I remember when I was younger and I would get frustrated with my mom because she didn't know answers, because I didn't start school until 3rd grade. I was in 3rd grade when I first went to school for the first time. And I didn't know anything. I knew nothing. And so I was always curious. And she would sit there and be like, well, why didn't you know that? Why didn't you know that? It's not that hard. You know, my mom was a mathematician. You know, she's an incredibly intelligent woman. She's so smart, it blows my mind. And I loved her for that. I loved how intelligent she was. I wanted to be that. And
And
while
which mom are you referring to right now?
my adopted mom,
Okay.
and she would just sit there and be like, it's so simple. Why are you having a hard time with that? And so I know that when Nathan is having a hard time in reading, or having a hard time in math, or having a hard time with anything, and once I started learning, I picked it up real fast. Turns out I was intelligent too. And I, to prevent any of that coming out of my mouth, I will sit down before I'll say, Nathan, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to sit there for a minute and then I'm going to come back out. So I don't get overly frustrated. Now, as it is with, you know, being frustrated with your children, we've had some yelling matches and I'm not proud of that, but I have never once said, you should just know that. And I think what you need to do is you need to look at your child as, I mean, not everybody, but I look at him as someday he's going to have my grandkids. And how do I want him to raise my grandkids? How do I want him, you know, the same thing goes in line is, how do I want him to raise my future daughter, you know, daughter-in-law? How do I want him to be a dad? And so I know that I obviously am not a perfect mother, you know, and I'm doing this all on my own. So frustration is constant because I have to work. I have to clean the house. I have to pay the bills. I have to be be the disciplinarian. I have to do all of those things. And so frustration happens. But when I hear my mother's words come out of my mouth, the first thing I do is apologize. And I never got apologies from my parents. So I make it a point that when I wrong them, especially when I have been hurt that way before and I just did it to them, I apologize. Now, I'm not one of those people. I will never give a hug when I'm angry. And I know that probably affects my children a little bit, but it won't affect them as much as when my mother would hug me when she was angry, because that was the only time she hugged me, was when she was mad. So I hate hugs. I can't stand them. But I hug my children so often that it doesn't matter. But I will not hug them when I'm angry. I tell them I'm going to go away for a second. I come back, and I say, I'm sorry, and just saying I'm sorry or apologizing and then saying what you did wrong is such a positive thing for not even just your children when you're reacting like that, but anybody else. Just apologizing for what you did wrong. I feel like it doesn't take away what you did, but it does make it better. So it's a hard thing, especially when I have 6 different parents who have all done things that are, that you learn differently. And yes, we do all end up turning into some of our parents. I read in a science journal once that by the time you're, 35, you have 75% become your parents. I was just like, no, I don't want to be that. But, sometimes it is inevitable. And I think you just need to catch your triggers, because sometimes that's all that it needs to take. That's all you need to do is find what they do that will trigger that reaction. And when they do that, go the opposite direction. Not of them, like of what you do.
Well, Aaron, you have given me an idea. Tawana, let's talk with our other co-host, Raven, and maybe we can put together a show and talk about people with trauma raising children without trauma, and talk about cool. how do people actually do that to not pass on the trauma and drama from their lives onto their children. How do we stop what some people in scripture might call generational curses and things like that? So you all who are watching either now or later, stay tuned. We've got more shows coming. We've got another show starting in a few minutes with another guest, Philip. And so Aaron, thank you so much for being with us today. Tawana, thank you for being my awesome co-host. And for all this work, thank you, Health HIV and DC Department of Health, for making this possible. We want you to get the help that you need. If you are dealing with a mental health concern or a substance use issue, please call 1-888-7-WE-HELP if you're in the District of Columbia. Call 311 if you're anywhere else in your area. You should get your local health helpline that can direct you to services in your area. You can also call the United Way, and they can point you in the direction of supports and services in your area. You used to be able to call 1-800-CHARTER, but that doesn't exist anymore. But that tells you how old I am, because I used to work for them. But anyway, thank you so much for being with us, Aaron. And thank you all for watching. Tawana, any final words?
Nope, just want to say thank you, Aaron, for sharing your story.
Don't forget to reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out. It'll save your life.
That's the final word. Thrive Live. See you next time.